deadline?
So Iran has, and you're entirely right, and this has said from day one that one of its first conditions will be Lebanon. And while there are negotiations, as you said as well, happening next week between Israel and Lebanon, mediated by the United States, Iran continues to push for a Lebanon ceasefire to be a requirement of the Iran and U.S. negotiations. So these things stick together and they have to do with one another. So it will be, of course, positive for us to see that there is successful negotiations tomorrow for the wider region, so for Lebanon and the war with Israel. But at the same time, if tomorrow ends up not being successful in terms of mediation between Iran and the United States, it will also have large repercussions, because while there is a sidetrack negotiation going on between Israel and Lebanon, the main file does remain within the Iranian negotiation track.
Also, Ms. Sarah, there are questions, there are reports which indicate that perhaps the civilian leadership of Iran may not be on the same page as IRGC. How credible are these reports? And is there a message being sent out by the IRGC for the civilian leadership to be perhaps more firm with Washington?
Absolutely. So we know that indeed the military and the armed forces within Iran run on their own military interests and understanding the sovereignty and military interests of Iran. So indeed, their leadership in many ways is less interested in the discussions of distrust and trust that there is with the United States, and is much more concerned with the sovereignty of Iran. In this case, when that distrust becomes a concern of sovereignty, as we see now with the Strait of Hormuz and so on, this is where indeed we will begin to see the Iranian armed forces begin to take a much more dominant role over the civilian leadership. For now, as it stands in terms of the threats to Iranian sovereignty, it seems to be quite balanced. It seems to be that there's a good understanding between the civilian and the military leadership within Iran. But we know from previous times of the conflict that the moment that there is a military threat that exceeds the Iranian military interest, the Iranian military forces and armed forces will indeed prioritize military interests.
Sarah, again, another question about, even before we get down to the brass tacks in terms of some of the key hot potatoes, whether that's the energy, whether that's uranium, whether that's Hormuz, even before we get to that, you mentioned the trust deficit. How realistic is it? We didn't see much progress in round one. How realistic is it that there could perhaps be a breakthrough, given the trust deficit that the two sides have with each other?
It is quite likely in a very exceptional scenario that we are in right now. The exceptional scenario is, of course, that Iranian distrust is quite large. But when the Iranians know that there's a major limitations on the U.S. side and there's an extended U.S. pressure, then the distrust can be put aside, right? Because you have an understanding that the other side needs this more than you. And currently that is what we're seeing. And this is also arguably why we see that there is this rush on the U.S. to get this, to get the talks going in Islamabad, essentially. We know that under U.S. law, a president can indeed do a military operation without approval of Congress, but a military operation is only under U.S. law 60 days. And that 60 days is coming up in the beginning of next week. After that, once the 60 days indeed is completed, we have what we call a war.